Yeah, thank you everybody so much for joining us. A very special guest on the show today, William Low from AudioQuest. I've waited long to have you on the show. I'm so glad you could finally join me. How are you today?
Very good, thank you. No longer 80 degrees in New York like it was yesterday, but still thrilling.
Yeah, it was quite a chilly winter, wasn't it, out that way?
Before I got here, there were some cold periods. That makes the news more because people love a disaster. But so yeah, there was a cold spell, but it's winter. Come on.
Yeah, I was in Jersey for a weekend. It was like -3, so it was a bit of a shock for me. I wanted to kind of just briefly touch on your history. I don't want to linger too long, but if you could you give the audience just kind of a broad brushstroke of what you've been up to the past 40, 50 years? Today's episode of The Occasional Podcast is sponsored by Border Patrol Audio Electronics, makers of the 300B tube amplifiers and the non-oversampling DACs. Hand-built in Virginia, USA, each Border Patrol product enjoys the benefit of owner Gary Dew's more than 35 years in the audio industry. Border Patrol's latest product, the Zola DAC, continues the brand's reputation for crafting natural and organic sounding DACs and promises refined, musical, fatigue-free listening for hours on end. Find out more at borderpatrol.net. That's www.borderpatrol.net. Today's episode of the Occasional Podcast is sponsored by VAC, the Valve Amplification Company. Since 1990, VAC has been handcrafting the world's finest amplifiers and preamplifiers exclusively in the United States. Utilizing vacuum tubes, the most linear amplifying devices in existence, VAC provides sonic transcendence. When it comes to musical truth, it has to be VAC. On the web at vac-amps.com.
When did a career in audio start? I almost feel like it was predetermined because I never chose it. I'm the kid who never grew up and got a real job. I never did figure out what that would have been. Well, didn't see it as fortunate at the time, but being fortunate enough to be sent away to excellent prep school as a 12-year-old, not long after sold my little child's record player for $13. So, even counting inflation, that's only $75 today or something. Bought someone else's used record player, discovered that a record player is not a single thing. It's a turntable, tone arm cartridge, and an amplifier and a speaker. My version of, well, still is, my version of porn is hi-fi magazines, and it was the Allied and Radio Shack and Lafayette catalogs back in that day, and ordering $1 speakers and $1 speaker cabinets and putting 7 of them around my room and hooking them up with not good cable, but it worked. My feeling, gut hedonistic, seeking pleasure and control feeling for owning my aural environment, emulating what other students who had much bigger allowances and real hi-fis, mostly KLH portables, you walk into the room and it's like, wow, I want to be here. Music owns this room, and that's easy in a small dorm room. But that relationship as a 12, 13-year-old is what I still seek. I've been living in it all my life in audio, but at the same time, it's a frontier and an edge, and we all crave a degree of novelty. We all need to give flowers to our system to renew the relationship, because it is really about a relationship. It is not about fidelity. So I am dwelling a whole bunch on what was a very long time ago, only 62 years ago. But that is the gut level relationship that I'm still playing out today. And I still feel sometimes like a toddler who will never figure it out as I move an amplifier from one system to another and then back to the system it came out of, because in the meantime I changed the DAC and now the amplifier priorities, the context has changed and the amplifier priority has changed. It is so much harder to curate a superb system today than it was when I was first in retail in the 1970s. The increase in resolution, what I call the false god of resolution, but the increase in resolution has meant that what we were told, we were told by who, but it was in the zeitgeist that, as things get better, the tube amp and the solid state amp and the three-way speaker and the two-way speaker or whatever, they'll all converge on a single approaching perfection. No, BS. They're parallel paths. And while in some theoretical, measurable way, better equipment approaches a point, a North Star that we can never get to, but there's a direction out there. In reality, the defining differences between the different paths, maybe I should have said planar versus omnidirectional versus point source and not said 2 to 3 way. Those fundamental compromises do not go away. If anything, they only become a higher percentage of what's different between the gear, not a smaller percentage. And the need for curation only becomes much more a matter of trial and error. We cannot figure it out no matter how much you read. And maybe that is the crux of most misunderstanding today. And when the internet is so easy, access to offer one guidance and a path and a presumed force of kind of clarity. But actually, I think it's much worse at that than it was in reading magazines 40 years ago, because people believe what they want to believe. And so that you can't read everything. You end up getting into a kind of an echo chamber. And reviews, woe is us. There aren't enough negative reviews or even qualified reviews. There might be a pros and cons in one of the European magazines, and the con is, well, this cable was a little stiff or something. Like, what the hell? You have to just make up something because they need to have pros and cons. Those are usually completely meaningless. And the nuance that we crave to acknowledge that, hey, if you want a pickup truck, it doesn't matter how good this Roadster is, kind of lost in most reviewing today. So I haven't necessarily answered your question, but described the world that is my engagement and my passion and how incredibly lucky I am to be living. I'm almost at the approach of saying having lived, living inside of this world that chose me more than I chose it.
You mentioned Radio Shack. Do you think the death of Radio Shack and the rise of the convenience of AI, how are those symbolic about what may or may not have happened in hi-fi at the same time? Because I feel like the death of Radio Shack is somewhat symbolic of the death of a hands-on growth experience, and now the hi-fi experience is a lot more consumption and conversation than people going out, or I'm just saying maybe it is, because I wasn't around back then, less than getting out and listening.
It's not like a definitive thing, but it's my sort of operative way of trying to conceptualize the trajectory of the audio business over the last half century. The 1978 to me was the peak of the fertility of the soil, in as much as everyone, not everyone actually, it's not like everyone was against the Vietnam War or any one thing, is never everyone, but a working majority. Component audio was appreciated. And I think that phenomenon peaked in 1978 and was a confluence, sort of the opposite of perfect storm, a confluence of social ingredients and some technological ones, the invention of the transistor. The only invention in my lifetime that to me has actually changed the human interface of regards to reproduced music was the Walkman. And that's a little bit later. And the ramifications of that took better part of a generation to fully play out. I grew up worshiping the idea of a turntable receiver and a pair of speakers. And so did much of my generation. The Walkman changed that. Personal stereo. So whether it's the Walkman, the Discman, the iPod, or the phone today, it doesn't matter that you can stream 100 million songs versus carrying 3 cassettes with you. That's irrelevant. It's the human interface, and the power of music is the same on any of them. But that interface was new and practically free. After the Walkman had been out for a few years, a kid could go to a drugstore and for the price of 3 cassette tapes, buy the entire music delivery system, injecting music directly into your brain, without your parents telling you to turn it down, except when they were trying to talk to you, or on a school bus, or on the subway, or in study hall, etc. That was a radical change, and therefore it's not surprising that fostered a radical further 30 years of dramatic change in the nature of the hi-fi business, because kids didn't grow up thinking you had to have speakers. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just needs to be acknowledged. And the industry would wring its hands and chastise itself and whip itself on the back for, we're not doing enough to take our message out there, and we should exhibit at watch shows, and we should do this and we should do that. No, we are a tiny little part of the tail of a much larger cultural dog. We have absolutely no control. Serendipity sometimes works in our favor, and starting in the 2000s, movies started all having a turntable and a hi-fi in them. Not all, but a significant percentage. Oh, yeah. One of my sort of favorite scenes that someday I'd like to see if I can get the rights to a clip was from a zombie movie called Warm Bodies. And I guess zombies aren't supposed to be able to talk, but the fellow can talk just a little bit. And he kidnaps a girl that he hopes will be his girlfriend, which doesn't sound like a good way to start, but heck, it's a movie. And he takes her home. He takes her to his home, which is on an airplane in an abandoned airport. And he plays her a record. And she says, "Why are you playing a record?" And this is, I don't know, a 2008 movie or something. I've forgotten the date. And he says, "Digital sucks." Well, yeah, digital was a real come down for those of us who were paying attention to absolute audio quality. However, at the time that the CD was introduced, it was wildly successful. Digital does not suck, but it did, to me. Not as badly as when Telarc was releasing digitally recorded LPs, and I thought, if this is the future of the business, I got to find something else to do. I mean, it really, really irritated me, but that was happening prior to the CD. So there's always an edge there, and there are always some ingredients that you can misread as like, wow, this is the death of music. Well, no, CDs went on to be a gold mine for the labels because they could re-release all their back catalog, and back catalog is where the profit is. We are just pawns on a larger playing field, and the home entertainment, socialization, drugs, marijuana in the late 70s notably fostered, particularly in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Madison, Wisconsin, stores where you walked into the store and were offered a toke and relax and let music be your god. And cocaine, again, marijuana was an important part of the cultural scene at the time, much bigger than cocaine, which got much more headlines for being more extreme. But cocaine also totally changed our business because it gave us disco. Nobody bought, I shouldn't say nobody, but almost nobody bought a hi-fi to listen to disco. Today, the social scene is still comparatively, and excuse me if I'm kind of behind on the terminology, but, techno, trance, house music, which again, the same thing. Almost nobody listens to that at home. It's a bifurcation of entertainment and the music that's personal, as in what a young adolescent goes through when they go from being, as a 6-year-old, a kid that dances around randomly because they just feel the energy and they feel good and they dance to the music. They go through generally about a 2-year period of music becoming personal and important, and the term "my music" becomes appropriate. Mm-hmm. In my day, I'd say that was between the ages of 12 and 14. Today, it's probably younger. But I also grew up in an era that was famously referred to as prolonged adolescent, kids that stayed in college forever. We were trying not to grow up. And the music was changing in the 60s and into the early 70s at such a rate that "Have You Heard the New?" had a meaning that it has not had since then. Partly because of the fracturing of the delivery systems as they're available now. We're practically no two people are listening to the same thing. We might both be using Tidal, but we're not listening to the same music. We're not sharing in that experience. Did you watch the episode of Cheers on TV last night when you're around the water cooler at the office? All of those ingredients. So Radio Shack was a deli of electronics, or a bodega in New York City terms. And Radio Shack had a program for you could go in there once a month and get a free battery. Sort of on-the-ground little stuff that you might need, which included component audio, because component audio was something a lot of people wanted, at least at the entry level, not necessarily that they pursued it as a hobby or an ongoing phenomenon to curate throughout their life. But it got them started. So Radio Shack's demise is partly a read on the larger culture and what the culture is looking for, but it's more probably a read on the nature and the changes in distribution and the rise of the circuit cities and the silos and the Best Buys. And I mean, most of them are dead. Best Buy is the survivor. In 1976, when I moved, or 77 when I moved to Southern California, nonstop advertising on the 2 stations that the lower half of the age demographic listened to, KLOS and KMET. Federated, Now Sound, University chains that could afford to advertise, and enough people wanted to buy Pioneer receivers that they could all survive. And the LA Basin had a whole network of Macintosh dealers, an older generation of a little bit more specialized dealers. they're all gone.
Yep.
Our business has always been turbulent. I was an adolescent, and if this was not a podcast, people would see that was a long time ago. I was an adolescent when I started referring to the audio industry as perpetually adolescent, meaning past childish and not mature. And that is 100% as true today as it was 50 years ago. Nothing wrong with that. That's the dynamic of our world. Did I answer any of your question?
I think you answered it perfectly. Thank you for that. You mentioned earlier a little bit about the roles kind of manufacturers, reviewers, and dealers, and they all kind of have their place in this, I guess you could say, figure eight maybe, or a circle. One feeds the other, one runs in a circle, right? Let's just say that. And along the lines, there's some type of professional responsibility of each category. What do you kind of find to be your observations on those three channels, those three kind of categories of operation as they kind of work with the greater audiophile market?
I wish, or at least as a reference for an aesthetic, even if impossible, that those three communities, well, not exactly those three. So I'm slightly bending the question, and we can come back to the manufacturer's role. The manufacturer makes the gear, but who does it go to? And to me, the reviewer, the store manager, and the consumer all have the same job, which is to go out and find the good stuff and do something about it. For the consumer, that would be, we'll take it home and let it be your emotional transportation that allows you to, or encourages you to want to be naked in front of the music and have a good time. And for the store manager, it should be recognizing the value of having product that the sales staff is enthused about. And there's a store that curates what it carries in the present because it's the best gear they know to exist and it's what they would buy themselves in the present, not beholden to being scared too much that it's something they sold a consumer 10 years ago. If they don't carry it anymore, the customer will complain that they got ripped off. A lot of the dealer community is really stupidly timid, in my mind. They would say intelligently timid, I would say. Not correctly. And then the reviewer, so the consumer, store manager, and reviewer, go out and find the good stuff. Well, as much as the community you're part of, the reviewing community, I have a lot of friends in it and the whole industry, and the reviewers, many of my best friends are the John Atkinsons and the Larry Archibalds and Mark Phillips. And as a community, reviewers do not go out looking for the good stuff. They are pushing back a wave of an onslaught, overload of products being pushed on them by manufacturers asking for attention. And I'm not saying the manufacturers do anything wrong to ask for attention, but unfortunately, it results in not enough going out and finding the good stuff and writing about it. So when there's a manufacturer, and this is close to my industry, so it sounds a bit self-serving, but I'm using Furman as an example, not the fact that AudioQuest is in the power business. Furman made, to my mind, the only power filters worth owning as a consumer, as a passenger, as a somewhat fanatical, sick audiophile, and I'm proud of it. Furman got no attention in the audiophile press because its history came out of only reliability mattered. It's only because there was a particular audio fanatic musician in charge of engineering at Furman that he forced the products into being the best sounding products that could be made. But the company didn't know how to interact with the audiophile community and ask for attention. So another product that, to be cheap with words and just say cost twice as much and was half as good, sort of became the blessed brand in the audiophile community because it was the best that those reviewers had heard. They were reporting accurately on a too limited data set. Yeah, that pains me because I think the better mousetrap should win. But the reality is that the better mousetrap does not guarantee any business at all. It's only an incremental advantage. And it's never the whole game. And sometimes it just isn't in the game at all. Well, that's sad. A different example of sad, so I don't know if it does work on the manufacturing side, because manufacturers can afford to be cynical. To me, this would be an example of somewhere between lazy and cynical. I believe, I could be wrong because nobody's got a complete survey, but my awareness, and I try to always be aware of what else is on the market, I've had the best or never less than the best optical toslink cables since about 1985. That's inexcusable because nobody in this business makes their own optical cable. They package it, but nobody makes the fiber. So we are all professional consumers. If we're doing our job, then any cable manufacturer is a professional consumer who goes out in the market and looks for the good stuff and to put the best they can find at each price into their product. And then once any one manufacturer, supplier, has a better product, in my ideal world, other manufacturers are benchmarking that and don't accept offering a product that's inferior when it's been proven that out there is a supplier of fiber who would sell them the same cable they're selling me. I've got no advantage except maybe to get there first if I'm good at my job. But I'm about to repackage my fiber optic cables into a new series of digital cables using new names. It'll be the third time that more than half of those models are the exact same fiber they were before, because it's not a category that has had progress. In fact, the best cable I used to offer, which was a multi-fiber quartz, I'm no longer able to offer because of outside of my control. So we're just consumers, just in the world, not about the hi-fi business exclusively. A not invented here thing, not paying attention to what other people are doing. How can you be proud of your product if you don't know how good the other guy's is? It just boggles me. But it's life. I'm sad that people don't copy my good ideas. I'm not saying that I have all the good ideas by any means. I'm an open book, maybe more than most, for explaining how my cables are made and what we think the priorities are that we're fulfilling. We don't have a lock on the truth, and we don't have the 100% truth because we're all human and none of us can see it completely. But it should be a more competitive game in the arena of a blind audio performance as compared to distribution and the other ingredients that are unignorable and important. And I totally acknowledge that. I'm not a good supplier to my customers who are the dealers. One perspective is I don't make audio and video products. I make tools for retailers, and the retailers I sell to are audio video dealers. So therefore my products, I wouldn't be in the hi-fi business if it weren't for that personal thing as a kid just getting high on music. But at the same time, my product's not going to get to the consumer, not going to be exposed or offered to the consumer unless it is the best tool for the dealer to stay alive, to do business. And there are many priorities. If discounting is a big problem, then nobody supports it. So there might be a bargain, but it's not going to be offered to the majority of the public. Less people actually might ever get the product that is perpetually on sale because the dealer can't make money. Those are very real considerations. And the retailer is where all these priorities have to meet and hopefully come together in a productive way.
Today's episode of The Occasional Podcast is sponsored by Woo Audio. Introducing the WA300BAL, Woo Audio's first speaker amplifier. Your room, your soundstage, perfected. Every listening room is different. The size, the walls, the furniture, the size of the speakers, they all shape the sound. So why has every amplifier treated both left and right channels exactly the same? Woo Audio asked that question, then they built the answer. Exclusive to the WA300BAL, 2 independent motorized control, 1 for each channel, giving you the power to precisely dial in your speakers wherever you can put them, and place every instrument, every singer, exactly where it belongs in your room. The room no longer dictates the imaging and soundstage. You do. No equalizer, no room correction digital processing. Just pure analog precision in your control from your listening chair until the music feels like a live performance happening in front of you. The WA300BAL is a pure tube design utilizing a quad of 300B tubes in a push-pull configuration to deliver 25 watts per channel of Class A power, fully balanced from input to output and zero feedback. Custom hand-wound output transformers. The chassis is machined from a single block of billet aluminum. The 300B tube has been an audiophile favorite for decades. The WA300BAL was designed to honor everything the 300B tube does best and elevate it to the gold standard of audio. Woo Audio is a family-owned company based in New York, famous for their vacuum tube headphone amplifiers. Learn more about the new WA300BAL at wooaudio.com. That's www.wooaudio.com, where better sound begins. Tired of audio reviews that sound like they were written by robots? Us too. For the last 15 years, Part-Time Audiophile has been an open revolt against boring. And this year, we're doubling down. We have a brand new look and a brand new name, but the same old attitude. Find us at pt.audio for all your turntable throwdowns and amplifier face-offs. Great sound meets good times at pt.audio. You mentioned the term emotional transportation earlier, and I've been thinking about this idea of what is realism in audio, and how do we get closer to it? How do we cuddle up to it? One of the ideas surrounding that I've always been toying with is the success of two-channel audio in realism as opposed to what was simulated through multi-channel and surround sound systems that I had growing up. How do you kind of react to that idea?
Oh boy, you've got that's a deep mine there. In two overlapping, in very important ways. The goal of a hi-fi, I tend to be devil's advocate and contrarian, and this punching bag of the absolute sounds answer to why should you have a good hi-fi, which is Harry Pearson's mantra of reproducing live music in your environment to be indistinguishable from it being live music in your environment. That's not a bad idea in terms of it being a reference, but it is like the North Star. There is a sense of direction. There are absolute hierarchies in audio. It's not all a matter of personal preference, but there's an awful lot of room for legitimate personal preference. But having a North Star is crucial. But thinking you can go there is insane. No hi-fi sounds real. And ironically, the closer it gets to sounding real, the more obviously it's not real, because there's less room for the imagination to think that it's real. There's a real human conundrum in human perception. We are like studio monitors in a recording studio whose purpose is not to sound good, but is to force artificial awareness over illumination so you can do something about it now. Well, fight or flight in an animal, and this is not just humans, means purposeful exaggeration by our perceptual system based on the need to either find food or not become food. And accuracy would be a defect. We are not, evolutionary pressure does not cause us to be accurate historians. We have horrible memories. We are terrible witnesses. Being accurate historians is not a human strength at all. I've had wonderful conversations with a professor at UCI, or University of California at Irvine. Actually, we had the conversations mostly in Scotland at a TED conference, who's done lab-type research that shows if humans actually were accurate in the way that they perceive the world, we wouldn't exist. We and all animals necessarily have to have biased perceptual systems, and in a sense, algorithms in our processing in order to cope with the world, because that's the challenge, is coping. Seeing reality is irrelevant. Coping with reality is life and death. So that's a huge misunderstanding. What does it mean to have the best hi-fi in terms of, thank you for picking up on the term emotional transportation, one that connects emotionally provocative software to an emotionally vulnerable recipient in a manner that is as good or better than live. Being live is actually a distraction, a philosophical dead end. It is having the emotional provocation and effectiveness of live, which I've been very sympathetic to times that someone has made comments in a comment section of Hi-Fi magazine and said, well, I actually enjoy listening to whatever particular kind of music, and this had to do with classical live acoustic music, more at home. There's nobody sitting next to me. We are social animals. You are affected by the people that are next to you, not just because they're coughing. In fact, I've read some very interesting stuff recently about why it is that facts don't win arguments. And it's basically because we are wired to be social more than we are to care about facts. The need to cooperate is the human killer app. And very possibly the reason why Neanderthals died out and Homo sapiens took over is the ability to cooperate in larger groups.
Right.
100% dependence on socialization. So defining the purpose of a good audio system as sounding real, it's code. Those of us inside our bubble, it has meaning. But if you parse it out like we're talking to an outsider, and you tell somebody, like, why do you care so much about your hi-fi? And you say, because it sounds real. Real is not a word that people who enjoy music, the other 90% of the population, would ever use when they describe why they liked your hi-fi versus another, or some positive experience they had. Peter Mitchell wrote an editorial column in Stereophile in 1993 about using Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill as the music and watching teenagers listen on earbuds and saying, who are we to tell these people that they don't know how good that music is because they're listening to it on earbuds, what would have been a Discman maybe at the time. No, you get high on music. You think of equipment like steps on a ladder, and one amp is better than another or not as good as another, or maybe it's sideways. But the human experience is binary. You're walking or you're flying, and terms like flow and as one and such that are used to describe that state where you sort of turn off self-consciousness and just, I overuse the term, allow yourself to be naked in front of the music. But whether it's bicycling down a hill, preferably from my case, or skiing or something where just the sheer physical thrill of it turns off human self-consciousness, which is something that we actually are all spend much of our life seeking as ways to not be self-conscious, because it is kind of the price of humanity, is that we stare at the chasms of death and loneliness our whole life in a way that we believe no other animal does in quite the same way. And it's extremely awkward. And we do our best over the course of our entire life to stave off that awkwardness and find comfort in frames of mind, institutions, social groups, sports fans, religions, many, many, many different ways. Recreation, we're in the recreation business, and recreation has social aspects. What are the activities you define as recreation? I think one of the things that pops up almost universally is distraction, taking us outside of ourselves and reducing self-awareness. And I glory to it. I'm glad to be an animal and a hedonist and have a good time. Music isn't, better hi-fi is not a higher moral ground where you're a better person because you have a better hi-fi. In some ways, we're the weak ones because we need $100,000 systems to get as high as someone else does with their earbuds. And I have a Bluetooth speaker that's $119 that actually does the job just as well as my $100,000 systems. It's the Bose Flex that Honda and I travel with. And when I put it on the floor of a bedroom, who knows where in the world, maybe I move it once or twice because I do have that audiophile sensibility to not want a bass resonance or something. I tend to put it on the floor, at the foot of the bed, facing away from the bed. It's all reflected sound. You put it in front of you and say, okay, blow me away. Well, it just sounds like a little speaker. But it is pretty amazing what a well-voiced little $100 Bluetooth speaker can do. And it's about the voicing, not about the resolution. I have an easier time believing in the performance from an absolute sound point of view with that Bose than I do with my Rockports or my Wilsons or my DeVores, because there is so much less information, but the voice is as good as my best carefully curated systems, and the imagination is free to create a space. Not do I believe it. If I start rationalizing and saying, can I really tell, squinch my eyes and say, can I really tell where that is coming from? Well, no, you can't in live music really either. That's just the wrong metric. There's a joke that works on people who understand it and is insulting to people who don't, but I'll tell it anyway. Why does a dog lick itself? And the answer being because it can. Why do audiophiles care so much about image specificity? Because we can. Because to someone listening to live music, they would never use language like that. It's like, oh, wow, the imaging specificity is so good. It sounds so real. I mean, this is audiophile lingo, and it's a substitute for actual understanding. It's a social construct. It's productive. I share it. But if you're looking for absolutes, then it's actually a distraction from the fact that we're all just hedonists who want to get high on music. Music is the world's most popular recreational drug. Sorry, I am kind of monologuing here, but about the algorithms in our brain and how important imagination is, and for that matter, for audio and for imaging specificity, how important our being dead wrong is to the way we relate to reproduced music. And that this does somewhat relate to the two-channel versus more channels thing. The more channels there are, the less room there is for the imagination. It used to be discussed more in the 90s than today. did you need 100 channels of amplification in order to have enough speakers to create a believable three-dimensional sound field? Then Atmos came out, and not being a home theater expert, I might be making some mistakes or exaggerating or simplifying something. But Atmos was sort of the discovery of stereo, that you can steer the image in between two speakers, meaning you don't need 100 speakers. You just need enough speakers that are not so far apart that you can't have virtual images between them. The rediscovery of two-channel. I have a 2.0 home theater system. The 0.0 is because my Rockports absolutely have enough bass. But the 2.0 part is because image you imagine is more believable than any literal image. So center channel can never be as good, in my way of perceiving audio, as a center channel speaker is. Because the center channel speaker is very specifically doing something that comes from the center as compared to my brain putting it there, which is far more powerful than actually trying to put it there when very few of us have perforated screen with the speaker behind the screen. That's just really not our world in a meaningful way. So if there were two tigers, two bears, whatever, out in the woods, you're walking along and you happen to be armed or pretending, and those two bears are identical twins and they are growling at you identically. Could be because they're scared or it could be because they're hungry. And you protected yourself by shooting at the bear that you perceive to be in the middle. You would be dead wrong. But the fact that that is how our perceptual system works is nobody in audio says, we are defective. They say they glory to creating a virtual image. And there's no reason not to. But it should be appreciated that virtual image is a virtual image. It's the result of 50 milliseconds of processing. After the energy, the kinetic energy is picked up by our ears, it takes about 50 milliseconds for the brain to first build an outline, which is why something like a first-order speaker does have an advantage, but is not required. It builds a skeleton, and then it fleshes it out over those 50 milliseconds through a combination of honoring the data it just received, but filtering it for a prioritization of fight or flight, pulling from memory, having heard something similar before, and imagination. And the fact that the image that almost is the definition of audiophilia is dead wrong is a glorious, wonderful thing. Isn't it wonderful that we're wrong and we can pull this trick? The only time hi-fi ever sounds real is if it's down the hall 3 rooms away and there's an open door. When you have gross filtering and not much information, your imagination might say, like, wow, I wonder if somebody's actually practicing the cello down there. The closer you get, the more obvious it is it's not live. And by the time you walk in the room, I'm sorry, there's no way in the world that it sounds live when it's not. And yet those are the references that we use as in your very good and pertinent and appropriate question about what is the role, the ideal for a hi-fi system. And I'm saying the ideal for a hi-fi system is that you have a high reward ratio and you use your hi-fi a lot because it enables a lot of pleasure. And acknowledge that that's what it's about. Choose gear and lifestyle appropriately with eyes open. Or ears open, I guess I should say.
How do you think that we as a group, audiophiles, reconcile the idea that we say so often, I'm a music-first audiophile, I'm a music-first audiophile, it's all about the music. We say it's all about the music. But then in turn, we just kind of discussed why someone who just listens on headphones gets more joy than adding in layers and layers of gear. So we have like these two somewhat opposing ideas where we're saying music first, but isn't it really gear first?
The difference between video as an entertainment, video with audio, versus, I hate the term two-channel audio. It was the hi-fi business, then it was the stereo business, and now because of the surround sound business defining home theater, which I think is a gross mistake, then the term two-channel has become the name for my priority. Video is something that unless you're a 6-year-old kid, a 4-year-old kid, where you might watch the same thing over and over, is basically something that is only watched once. And the allocation of time is based on a risk-reward ratio about the allocation of time being worth your time. You like football, so you're going to watch the game. a comedian on late night has been funny before, or you've heard he's supposed to be funny, so you allocate the time. You want to know what the weather is. It's an allocation based on a reward from software that has not yet happened in the case of anything on live broadcast, because a new movie is out or a new series is out and it's in the zeitgeist and you're a fan of the actor, whatever it is. It's an allocation of time not based on experience of that software until it's experienced. And once it is experienced, it's not likely to be ever indulged in again. If somebody wants to watch the Super Bowl, they'll watch on their phone because it doesn't matter that it's their phone. They're going to get the information that answers the why do I care, why do I want to watch. But there's so many other reasons why people used to go out and buy big screen TVs before the game, because they wanted to be to have the system that their friends would come over and party in their house, and it's such a social construct. And there are certainly people who are absolutely fanatical about having the best home theaters in the world, and that's wonderful. But they're not bribing themselves to watch the software. They're more nearly like a car relationship. Well, I'm going to have a car anyway, so therefore I want a good one. But audio, when it's to play music that, just to pick a number that I think is not accurate in the sense of particular, but as a theme, 90+% of the time we listen to music we've heard before. My comment about music as the world's most popular recreational drug, we play music that we know how it makes us feel, and we choose to have that feeling. It has no temporal component. If it's music you've already heard before, you could do it any time. Why now? And so we get into sometimes spoken, sometimes unspoken. Is my system good enough to be worth my time? Not is the music good enough to be worth my time, but is the system good enough to be worth my time? And so we play a psychological game with ourselves. That sounds pejorative, or it sounds like I'm disrespecting it. No, I live it. I am that person. I am curating my hi-fi every day. I'm lucky. I'm in the business. I could give more opportunities. I can afford to do that than most because I never lose money on anything I buy. So I'm a special case, but I'm also universal. That contrast, I think, is very illuminating on the nature of the peculiarities of the connoisseurship and the ways in which connoisseurship of good audio leads to an awful lot of dead ends, but it also can be a hell of a lot of fun and very rewarding to play out. That ultimate accolade is the staying up till 4 o'clock in the morning, rediscovering my music, as though they're now having a better experience than when they did it a year ago and the year before and 10 years earlier and 20 years earlier. You don't get higher on music as you grow up. There's a phenomenon of what I call peak experience. And the peaks themselves cannot be compared. Peak is a relationship, not a height. It's not an intellectual hierarchy of steps on a ladder. It is when you are truly unself-conscious and maybe getting a bit of a kick out of the fact that you know how hard it was to put together a stereo that's that good. But it doesn't mean that it being better is getting you higher than you got 20 years earlier. And in many ways, none of us can ever fully recapture the surprise and discovery of the first time as a 15-year-old or something. We had an experience that started our path on this wonderful journey of music and sensuality being part of our life. Another aspect of your comment about I'm a music person. Well, it means I don't just listen to test records, is what it means for some people. I find myself slightly doubting the music thing versus the sensual thing, because something like the soundtrack of White Lotus Season 3 just totally tickles me. Now, is that music? It's not music I would ever listen to without it being background or emotion setting or part of something larger experience of which the eye tends to kind of take a priority. But yeah, I kind of bugged my wife a few times when there'd be like the sound 100 feet over there and 50 feet over there and 20 feet high. Isn't that amazing? And she'd say, what are you talking about? I'm watching the story. But we're both indulging, sharing in the benefit of that soundtrack and its emotional, holistic effect on our bodies and our state of mind. I'm just the sick audiophile who's conscious of it. Is that a blessing or a curse? Both.
That's very interesting because my wife, I was going crazy about the particular plots and the turns, and he has a slightly very interesting formula. I'm going on this. And she said to me, did you notice they changed the main theme for season 3? I think they had the same opening theme as it comes in was pretty similar for 1 and 2. And then 3, they dropped some of the more flute instrument sounds out of the background. And she was the first to notice it. And I was very surprised.
Well, they went for the Thailand thing. So in my life, I have to admit, I don't spend much time. I don't sit on a sofa staring at a turned off TV listening to hi-fi. I used to, but my hi-fi systems are in my bedrooms. Every night before we go to sleep and while we go to sleep, we play music. I've always believed music should go to where I am. I should not have to go to it. It's, in that sense, it's like a car stereo. It's an accompaniment to my life. And I treat it as a destination activity in terms of what quality I want. But in practice, I put it where I live. I don't go to it. And the bedroom is the perfect place for music. Ironically, maybe it's not ironic, but coincidental, or it's more coincidental. When you're lying in bed, your head back, the world is only 180 degrees. At the moment that you lean your head all the way back, there's a profound sense of loss compared to the three-dimensional space of your head being upright. Our perceptual system is prioritized in the horizontal, and that's what the brain is used to, and that's what it would like to have. But after about 10 seconds of only living in a 180-degree world, meaning your head is truly back on a pillow, the brain adjusts. That is now your complete world. It doesn't mean you're going to hear sound coming from behind you, but the entire world in front of you now has less information, partly because our perceptual system is optimized in the horizontal and not coming from our feet. The imagination fills the room. I don't hear discrete sounds happening, far, a little behind me and to the right or something. And I still have a sense of where the musicians are, much more the way I would have a sense of where the musicians are if I had my eyes closed in a live concert, where you don't have the kind of imaging specificity that we crave so much in hi-fi. It fills the room. I still know that people are not 20 feet tall, but the sound field is more like altered states. It is more immersive thanks to having less information. That doesn't mean the vector is carefully put blankets over your speakers and have less information and you'll be happier. Not at all. It's more of a kind of a conundrum to say that the believability of the music is better when you have less information at the same time as we justifiably crave hearing the breath, hearing fingers touch a string separate from the phenomenon of playing, of plucking them or making a note. That aliveness that I get as turned on by that as anybody. So I hope nobody misinterprets that I'm decrying those things. But if that is one's personal vector, nothing is as important to me as hearing the breath of the singer. I'd say, well, maybe you're not really listening to the music. All music is a rendering. Music starts with a composition in somebody's head. The composer might noodle around on the piano or in whatever form, or they might be Beethoven and they're deaf and they can't do that. It becomes a file, akin to a digital file, the intellectual phenomenon of the music as a composition. Every live performance is a rendering, and no two of them are identical. They're not identical because they have different audiences, they're in different rooms, the temperature, the humidity, the musician is hungry or was sick the day before or has got a hot date that night. No two renderings are the same, and while many of them can be poor, there's no one right or best. They are peaks that cannot be directly compared. They're alternates, the best ones. And they might be a minority, but the point is there's not only one version. Then we capture a rendering, and we record it, and treat that as the truth, which is already only a particular perspective with the gross limitations of our ability to record. I mean, microphones, my heavens. The choice of a microphone is one of the most important decisions a recording engineer ever makes. And it's not because they're accurate, it's because they're colored, and they are chosen with a sensitivity to those colorations and the particulars of the instrument or the singer. Then that rendering comes out of a hi-fi. It's a rendering of a rendering, and no two of those renderings are ever identical. So are they real? Yeah, that there's kind of a North Star relationship to honoring the truth, or that it sounds like a real person saying into that microphone. Not like a real person who's in your room, but it at least sounds like a real person saying into the microphone. We can aspire to that. But we also can't if the type of microphone just really makes that impossible. We don't have control over that. And are we only going to listen to music that was recorded a certain way? There was a period, and I'm good friends with David Chesky in particular, and Norm, and respectful of what they did. But when they first went into the more of a studio context or rock and roll direction of music, trying to use a two microphone technique did not serve the human interface, to me, particularly well. AudioQuest started out. AudioQuest Music was in its way, a successful label, although I lost a lot of money in the 90s. It started out with Cavi Alexander, Water Lily Acoustics, had kind of a shtick where he would get audio manufacturers to fund a recording, and then they would get a whole bunch of albums they could give out to kind of a good PR, the halo effect. And I bought into that idea. It was good fun. And we did a recording with Cavi Alexander at a church in Santa Barbara, a not yet that successful duo called Struns and Farah. So it was actually the recording I made probably as much money on as practically every other recording I did combined, because they did make it big and I became back catalog. So we recorded with two mics in a church in Santa Barbara. That technique was absolutely perfect. We recorded Trio Gallantry that way. We recorded our first AudioQuest music label recording, Robert Lucas, Delta Blues, that way. But then when we recorded Robert with his band doing Chicago Electric Blues, we went into a studio. We went into Ocean Way. They've since changed names, but one of the best studios in Hollywood. And we did, Joe Harley, who's now tone poet at Blue Note, was just a natural genius in combination with a very, very good engineer in honoring the sensibilities, being an audiophile, a fanatical audiophile all his life, as Joe has been and is, honoring the result and not applying the dogma, a misapplication of a dogma about how one should get that result. And the greatest compliments, this was the first studio recording we ever did, and Keith Johnson, justifiably famous for reference recordings, asked Joe, how did you get that sound on that bass guitar? Well, the bass guitar was plugged into the console with a small amount of bleed to provide an acoustic effect in combination, but it could not have happened if we recorded it at a distance. It required being plugged into the console. The vocalist was in a booth. On the back cover of the album, there was a picture of the band in a big room, kind of as if it's what you wanted to believe. We weren't trying to deceive anybody, didn't see it that way until afterwards people made comments, as if the band had played like a live band in a big room. John Atkinson gave glowing review to the recording, and with the accolade that the sound of electric instruments in real space. It's kind of an oxymoron, but also a perfect description of the human effect that the recording had. And what mattered is the effect, not how it was achieved. Yes, it mattered how it was achieved, otherwise we couldn't have had the effect. But dogma would have prevented us from ever making that good a recording. Audiophile dogma would have prevented us from ever making that good a recording. It's doing what you need to, and the recording business is so different from most audiophiles' fantasy of how things are recorded or should be recorded. Because if they work properly, it's like magic, and they don't see how the rabbit came out of the hat. They just see that the rabbit does come out of the hat.
You mentioned a little bit about emotional peaks, how we use music to find a new peak or return to a peak that we've once felt. Do you think that there's an element of listening to records that involves increased labor, okay, that is a passion of love, that inherently makes us appreciate the music more because we put more work into listening to it?
This is like you're teeing up my favorite subjects. Thank you. But I don't see that as being best explained at the high end, but at the low end. Urban Outfitters was probably the world's country's largest seller of turntables. That ended about the time COVID began. That was just in 2019. Urban Outfitters was beginning to take the Crosley turntables and the albums out of their shopping center store windows. But there had been a period, I made some reference earlier, starting in the 2000s and the zombie movie and such, of it being a cultural movement, because software had gone from being album-oriented on LPs playing 15 to 22 minutes at a time to the cassette, which could be stopped anywhere and continued, but it was the whole album in one play if that's what you chose to do, to the CD with random access, which is very different from the cassette in that you could choose to play a track over and over or do shuffle, or it introduced a bridge to, in some ways, to the iPod generation, which was about downloading songs much more than it was about downloading albums. Mm-hmm. So the music relationship fractured into kind of an ADHD sort of a situation. And in response to that, the real world, not the audiophile world, and the hipster movement and a whole bunch of things, came to appreciate making a commitment long enough to immerse in a mood and short enough to have time for. Mm. And ironically, in the sense of it being a discontinued, supposedly obsolete technology, the LP is perfect because an entire album, 45 to 70 minutes, whatever, is, in today's world, more time than most people will commit to. Right. They might spend that time, much time or more, right. But make the commitment is the crucial part. If you don't open the door and go in, it doesn't. 15 to 22 minutes, so I'm just picking numbers, but they're roughly the one side of an LP, is bite-sized in that, well, yeah, I got 20 minutes. What do you got for me? Long enough to be inside that world, be immersed in it, feel it, develop a relationship for it, and then somebody might continue and listen for hours, but continually making bite-sized commitments. Here in New York, I bike every day. I'm looking at the sun out there in Central Park and saying I should be out there because it takes me 30 minutes to bike around the park. And if the weather's good, I can find 30 minutes basically every day. When I'm in Southern California, I live near Newport's Back Bay, it's an hour 10, for me to go out and do the 12 miles and the hills. Not so bad, but I'm a weakling. I'm not an athlete. So I bike much more in New York City with the half-hour episode than I do in Newport, where it's an hour and 10, and I struggle to find once and maybe 2 times a week that I have the time to do that. Some people say, well, yeah, I have many similar things in my life. They say, no, I don't know what you're talking about. You're crazy. Music is so important. I would never not give it a full hour at a time. There are a number of ingredients that audiophiles don't always consider. So the purposefulness of basically what I call playing music on purpose and having the experience be long enough to be immersive. The vinyl revolution didn't start at the top. It started at the bottom as a lifestyle in the dog as compared to in the tail, in my earlier comment about we are just a tail wagged by a much bigger dog. And it's a minority phenomenon, and it will continue to be a minority phenomenon, but it has more legs than I thought it would have. But these things are generational. They're 20 to 25-year waves. Mm. So it's not that vinyl is going to ever die, but it will be more like the 78 someday for reasons I can't foresee. Because it is inconvenient. I have 4,000 LPs, and I built a place for them in my condo in California. They're not in New York. I used to go to sleep with LPs and a semi-automatic or a changer at one time in my life. But now, why on earth would I go to bed listening to LPs when streaming and the CD, for me, is the absolute equivalent? If it's an album I have and it's not available on streaming and I don't have a CD, then there's no choice. But then I still don't, that's not what I choose to go to sleep to because I don't want to have to get up and turn it off. Same reason I'm not going to use a tube amplifier unless it has an auto shut off after a couple of hours. I don't want to wake up and I got to go turn off the amp. Practicality interferes. So yeah, I like LPs, but personally I've been using CDs, the great majority, for the last 20 years. And in the last not that many months, since my streaming system has improved to a point where it's better than CDs ever were for me, which I didn't think would ever happen. And I'm not saying that local storage and it still has an advantage. But it's peculiar. We all play games with ourselves. I made a commitment quite a few years ago to, I'm going to get this whole bunch of streaming things and the best filters and the best I can do, and I'm going to start ripping all my CDs because I know local storage is better than coming from outside. And I bought the machinery that would allow me to rip 40 CDs at a time without having to attend to every single one. And then I never used it because having some of my music sound better only means that the 100 million songs that I haven't downloaded are at a disadvantage. And I don't want that to ever be an ingredient in my choosing what music to play. So I have made the choice to accept slightly less performance from the music I would play more often in order to have a level playing field and an open door to what I might play tonight that I haven't heard before or downloaded. It's just personal wrestling. We all answer these questions in a way that is most suitable to ourselves, and that's the compromise that I've made and am very happy with at this point in time.
One of the last things I kind of had for you is a verbal exercise that I'm doing at the end of every episode this season. I'm going to ask you a series of 4 questions, and there'll be options within those questions, and you have to choose just one word.
Well, I'll try.
It's pretty easy. No one's failed it yet, and there are no right or wrong answers. So, pick only one. A Mint LS35A or a Quad ESL 57?
Damn. Because, obviously, we should come back with a whole lot of questions about the context.
No context. We're just doing word.
Well, not that's where universality becomes the dominant variable, and I'll go for the Mint LS35A.
Pristine soundstage or pristine tone?
Tone.
Height, width, or depth?
If they don't come together, then none of them are relevant.
You got to pick one word.
Which is not one word. I'm sorry.
That's why it's a word exercise. You got to pick one, only one word.
Depth.
Perfect bass or perfect treble? And I will say a little context to this. Just because one is perfect does not mean the other one is bad. You just have perfection in the bass or perfection in the treble.
Treble, because bad bass doesn't make me not listen, and bad treble does.
That's it. Good answers, good answers.
Well, no wrong answer, as you said, but fascinating process. Thank you.
William, thank you so much for your time today. I've really genuinely appreciated all your answers, and the way you think is very refreshing. So thanks again for joining us on the show. Anything you kind of want to say on the outro here on the way out?
Thanks for listening. Thanks for caring, and I applaud you.
Thanks so much, man. The Occasional Podcast is a production of the Part-Time Audiophile Network, which includes parttimeaudiophile.com, The Occasional Magazine, the PTA newsletter, and audiohead.com. You can stay in touch with us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. The Occasional Podcast is produced and hosted by Brian Hunter, executive produced by Scott Hall at PTA Productions. The Occasional Podcast and its original associated music is monitored, mixed, and mastered on the Focal Trio 6 BE studio monitors. AI songs produced by Udio.com. If you haven't already, please subscribe to The Occasional Podcast on iTunes, Google, Spotify, or wherever your favorite podcasts are downloaded.
Occasional podcast where hi-fi greets from part-time audiophile chasing perfect beat. Cable sound and stories, hi-fi in the know. For the first time on the show, Bill Low from AudioQuest. Let the music